Hi everyone, Samir and Samet here, and welcome back to our Formula One podcast. Today we'll be discussing the 2023 F1 preseason testing, and we'll be casting our predictions for who we think is going to be at the front this year. Yeah, so as you guys know, preseason testing just finished up in Bahrain. The drivers and teams had 3 days of testing. They had like the whole day. They had morning sessions, and then took like a lunch break, and then evening session. And so the teams got a lot of data, and we're kind of going to be looking at it based on how we did it in our last episode. So we'll be going down the order of the constructors championship last year, and we'll be discussing the through the different teams. We'll be discussing things like what they've changed on the car, or maybe like how we think they're going to do this year. And some teams haven't revealed their liveries since some teams have revealed their liveries since the last time we did an episode, so we'll talk about them as well. So let's get started then. We'll look at Red Bull Racing first because they won the championship last year. And I don't know about you, but I think they're in for a three-peat this year. I mean, yeah, they've been gelling ever since 2021, honestly, with their car, their driver lineups, and just the whole vibe in the team. I mean, granted, we did see in Sao Paulo last year, there was some rivalry between Verstappen and Perez there after Perez didn't let Verstappen by, or Verstappen didn't let Perez by on the last lap. And so that kind of sparked a bit of controversy amongst the Red Bull team. But Horner says they'd have everything settled out now, and it looks like they're back to like where they were before. I mean, they seem to be liking each other again now. And honestly, we saw their car this year, and it's almost the same. I mean, they did change their side pods a little bit, but I think they just took up the phrase "don't fix what's not broken." I mean, unbelievable season they had last year, 17 wins with the RB18, and so their RB19 is very similar to it because they were already miles ahead of everyone last year in 2022. Yeah, so obviously I think that they're gonna have another really good season. And in terms of what you said about the side pods, last year was kind of more of a curved shape where it says Oracle, but now it's kind of like a flat shape and then it goes into the curve. And I think that might be something to do with the regulations because I've seen that throughout most of the cars too, there being like a flat area there. And so another thing you might notice too about the cars is that they're not going to be sparking as much, and the ride height is going to be increased a little bit because that's due to the technical regulations. The minimum ride height has been increased a little bit, and that's to reduce the amount of porpoising that we've been seeing on these new ground effect cars, especially because of how big of a thing that was last year in terms of like a safety hazard too as well, especially like what we saw with Lewis Hamilton in Azerbaijan, I think it was. But he crawled out of the car and his back was hurting a lot. But yeah, that's why they did that. I think it's a really good thing that FIA did for driver safety. I mean, Baku last year was a great example of porpoising like on every team. Like even Red Bull and Ferrari had porpoising there because the streets were so bouncy. I mean, it was just killing the driver's back. So I think raising the ride height is really good. I mean, Red Bull also, they're still running their car pretty low. Like compared to the limit, it is still really low. So that just shows that Red Bull can get, with that floor design, they still can get that ground effect while keeping driver safety a top priority because we haven't heard any complaints of Verstappen or Perez after this testing complaining about too much bouncing. So it looks like Red Bull are in for a really good 2023. Yeah, they did have one issue in the preseason testing. I think that they had to go to the garage to fix something and they had to cover up the garage. And the rule about covering up the garage is that they can't cover it up unless they have to take the floor off. And I think that this was like day two or something. So they wouldn't take off the floor for any reason. So they obviously must have had some problem. But if that was a problem, it seemed to be the only one because other than that, they had a really smooth session, and I think they got through their whole run plan and they distributed their drivers evenly. Well, about that, actually, Verstappen, he didn't really get the best track conditions. He, I think, took all of Friday and then part of Saturday, whereas Perez got part of Saturday and then, or he got the last three sessions. Verstappen got the first three, which means like Perez got the best track conditions because that's when all the rubber would have been laid down and everything. So I think that kind of shows that like how confident Verstappen is feeling, but that also shows how much Red Bull are now starting to back Sergio Perez. He had a really good season last year, and I think they're just putting even more confidence in him this year. So yeah, Red Bull, they had a straightforward test, like really good. One problem that we said, but other than that, really smooth session. I think it's a good thing too for backing Perez. It'll improve his confidence within the team, and he'll really need that if he wants to challenge reigning two-time world champion Max Verstappen. But also now Red Bull, they do have options if Perez doesn't step up. Obviously, over this offseason, we saw Daniel Ricciardo come back to Red Bull as a third driver, so everyone knows what he's capable of. I mean, personally, I don't think his stint at McLaren really shows how capable he was. I mean, he did win a race for them, their first win since 2012. And so we know how capable Ricardo is. Christian Horner knows how capable he is. And so Perez will need to step up this year. I mean, his contract does go until 2024, but they could end it this year if he doesn't step up. That's what happened with Ricardo and McLaren. He was supposed to stay until 2023, but they ended it early. So Perez will really need as much confidence and all the backing he can get if he wants to keep that seat at Red Bull. Yep. So now let's move on to the next team, the team that finished second in the Constructors' Championship last year, and that's Ferrari. And they had a pretty good, smooth preseason test. I don't think they had any problems. They gained lap time compared to last year's car. The drivers were both feeling really happy about it. Their car also, like in terms of their livery, has more like black spots of exposed carbon fiber to save weight. And but in terms of their aero, I think they've kept the same like bathtub side pods that they had last year. It seemed to work for them, so I guess that's why they would keep it. Yeah, also in the side pods, they do have that still bathtub curve on the sides, but they also added another opening in the middle of it, right on the sides of the engine covers. I think that provides more cooling for the engine, which is good. And also, we saw one issue they had on the front wing. They were trying to, there's a new limit for weight redistribution where they have to redistribute the weight properly across the car, and the power unit has to be a kilogram heavier than it was last year. So the teams have to distribute more weight to the front of the car. And so Ferrari, they put more weight in the front of the car, but they spaced it out around the edges. And so when they were going down the straight at really high speeds, yeah, we saw a sort of dip in their front wing. Like the carbon fiber just bent and created sort of like a dip in it, and everyone thought, oh, maybe wow, this is some crazy revolutionary idea they've come up with, but they came out and stated, no, it was just a plain error. The carbon fiber was too thin there. We didn't intend for it to work like that. So Ferrari, they have it fixed up, but it just shows not everything can be is a intended feature on cars. Yeah, especially a team like Ferrari, they can't be screwing up anymore this year after all the backlash they got last year. But in terms of their management, though, they've changed that up as well. Fred Vasseur coming in as their team principal, Binotto's thrown out, and also their head strategist, Inaki Rueda, was replaced. I think he moved to a factory role now, but they brought up another guy too to be their lead strategist. And so hopefully now they'll have some good strategies this year because they have a good car. They had a good car last season, but it was just like the way they executed their strategy. But yeah, throughout this test, both drivers, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, were both really happy about how their testing went. They were both happy about the car and how it felt. So we're just gonna have to wait to see how they do next Saturday. I think it's a really important year for Ferrari, especially Leclerc. I mean, Sainz has been really close to him these past few years. Last year, it sort of looked like Sainz was gradually improving, whereas Leclerc started out strong, but it looks like sort of he was losing all that momentum, and then he gained it back sort of at the end of the season. So I think it's a really important year for Leclerc in terms of the fact that he needs to deliver. If Ferrari have a good car, he needs to consistently be extracting the maximum out of it. He can't be having any more mistakes like he did in France, where he spun out by himself. he needs to fix those mistakes and lock them down so he can take the fight to Verstappen and Red Bull.
Yeah. So now let's move on to the next team, the team who finished third. That's Mercedes after their impressive fight back last season to finish third, nearly second. But in terms of their preseason testing, I think both drivers were like they felt that it was definitely a much better car than the stage that they were at last season. But obviously, we know that they went back to their full black livery, and that's probably also to save weight. And that's kind of a trend we've been seeing also throughout the whole teams. All of the teams are that they're now a lot darker. They have a lot more shades of black in them. That's all that exposed carbon fiber or exposed material to save weight, because paint can become really heavy at times, and we don't and all the teams don't want that extra weight to be holding them down.
Yeah, like for example, the McLaren last year, when they first launched it, everything was completely covered with either orange or blue, basically. Now this year they came out with their livery. A lot of it was like black and orange. But going back to the Mercedes, that all black livery, yes, it does look cool. It's reminiscent of their extremely fast W11 in 2020. But also, it's a really smart thing they did with the weight saving. Almost all of their car is covered with bare carbon fiber, and there is just a little bit of black paint everywhere. But that does help them save a lot of weight so that they can focus on other issues they had from last year.
Yeah, and throughout the test, they did have one issue on day three. George Russell's car had to be stopped. It had to be stopped, and then they had to take it back to the garage, and that caused a red flag. I think that was their only issue. I think the team are looking to just develop that car now throughout the rest of the season. But I think both drivers were really happy about it in terms of the progress that they've made, and it did look pretty quick actually. Like Lewis Hamilton was able to put it like at the top of the times occasionally before he was beaten by some other people, but it does look like a much better car when you look at the onboards than it was last year. So I think they're making steps in the right direction.
Yeah, and also the driver lineup for this year with Mercedes again, Russell and Hamilton. It's really interesting to like Russell gaining more confidence, obviously getting that race win in Sao Paulo last year. He also got a lot of podiums and top five finishes last year, so that was really good from him. But also for Lewis Hamilton, it'll be a year he'll want to try to improve on massively from last year. Last year was the first year in Formula One where he didn't get a pole position and a race win, and it's also the first time he hasn't won two titles in a row since since like 2013, where he's gone 2 years without winning a single world title, and so he'll be wanting to go back into championship contention this year. But and it'll be really interesting if there's a three-way battle for the world championship between Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes. I'm really excited because I think Mercedes, they've been gelling, so it looks like they're in for a good 2023.
Yep. So now let's move on to the next team, and that team will be Alpine. And they have a really strong driver pairing this year of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. So it'll be exciting to see how those two perform. And in terms of their preseason test, I think they also had a really good one. I think they were the only team though who seemed to gain a little bit lap time compared to their car last year. But last year they also had a really good car. So maybe like it's one thing, and maybe they'll be able to fix that, and we'll see how it goes for them.
Yeah, I don't think they really gained a lot of time this year. I mean, it might be due to the fact that they have a new driver, so that new time it might just be like Gasly trying to gel with the car. I mean, Ocon though, he's been doing really good with it. Like last year, he did do pretty good, but also this year he'll be wanting to prove that he's a lot better with Gasly. I mean, like, Gasly, we've seen a really good driver, especially 2021. He performed really well, but 2022, he kind of fell off, whereas Ocon was sort of growing more. And so it'll be really interesting to Alpine have two really good drivers. So if they can deliver a good car, it'll be a good year.
Yeah, but Gasly last year, it was also due to the car a little bit. AlphaTauri finished ninth too, so they didn't really do that as good as they wanted to, especially in 2021 where they had that good car. But yes, Alpine also did really good. That's why they finished fourth. But I think Gasly will have some new confidence now at Alpine.
Mhm. And in terms of that car too, we saw them like keeping with the traditional um, curved side pods and that sort of sharp front wing. And so Alpine have done a really good job with trying to keep that aerodynamics that a lot of the other top teams have had last year.
Yeah, and also another thing with their car too, like above the engine cover, you'll kind of see kind of like what Red Bull had on like where it says Honda on their car, but that thing is kind of that outer dent kind of is moved up a little bit, and you can see that on almost all of the cars this season too. That's another one of the things that all the teams have been doing, but it's especially noticeable on the Alpine. Like it goes, there's an indent and then this sticks out right above the engine cover. That's probably also due to the regulations or better airflow as well.
Another thing I forgot to mention when with the Mercedes, what they had done was with their front wing, like Alpine, they had their front wing pretty sharp too, kind of. But Mercedes, they had a front wing idea that they had last year, but they weren't able to use it. And this year now we saw Ferrari running that design, and so everyone was wondering how they were allowed to use it. But the regulations changed and said Mercedes could use that livery or that front wing design this year where they have on the top winglets of the front wing, they have more attachments that allow for better airflow. And so Mercedes actually they went the other way of using that design and they were like, we'll utilize a different part of the front wing. So in that connection between the end plate and the main wing of the front wing, they added more flaps here. And Haas and Mercedes were the only teams to do that. And that allowed for even more airflow just on underneath the tire sensors. So Mercedes again exploiting different parts of the front wing for other teams to use. See.
Yeah, so I think Mercedes are or Alpine are in a pretty good state in terms of their car. But we'll also again with most of the teams, we'll just have to see how they do on qualifying or even throughout the free practices because testing teams don't really like to push the car until the very last day, and even then we didn't like really see some competitive times. But yeah, let's move on to the next team then, and McLaren. And they had a pretty woeful preseason testing. I don't think is looking too good for them. In terms of their driver pairing, a really strong driver pairing. Lando Norris and the new rookie Oscar Piastri, the Formula 3 and Formula 2 champion. So he obviously has a lot of talent. But McLaren then once again in preseason testing having a lot of problems. And right from day one, they had a ton of problems starting off with like their brake area around like where the brakes are. They had to tape something up there because it failed, and Lando Norris was stuck in the garage for a long time. And they completed like the least amount of laps, I think, out of every team. So they obviously got the least amount of data.
Yeah, McLaren have had that same issue that they had at the beginning of last year too. I mean, last year they also struggled with the braking issues quite a lot. This year, same thing, but now they've just had poor reliability throughout this first preseason testing, and then also just in general. I mean, it doesn't look like they've made huge improvements, whereas their competitors around them, Aston Martin and Alpine, they've really stepped up this year. And so, sorry, McLaren fans. I mean, I think it's going to be a really tough first couple of races for the Papaya team.
Yeah, we also saw Oscar Piastri bring out the first spin in of the preseason testing, and it took us to like day three to get it. But I don't think like it might be because he's a rookie, but like the other rookies seem to do fine, so it might have been the car.
Yeah, that McLaren doesn't really like to the run that lowly over the bumps. I mean, they're running pretty lowly too, but those bumps really catch them out with their floor design. So it's going to be pretty rough, especially Bahrain. It has pretty rough bumps around some parts of the track with the curbings and everything. So Bahrain could be really tough for them.
Yeah, I think also Saudi Arabia as well, but I don't think it's gonna be a really good first couple of rounds, maybe like first 5 rounds for them, just because of the lack of data that they were able to get, and just the lack of running too that each both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri were able to get. But obviously, we've seen McLaren, like, they've had a rough couple of years in the past, and they've been able to turn it around. So especially the drivers too, they'll definitely be able to extract some things from the car. But as of now, I don't think. I think right now, in terms of their performance as well, they're definitely gonna be last in the championship just for a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be a really tough couple of races for them. Now let's move on to Alfa Romeo. They finished sixth in the championship last year, and they've definitely made a lot of improvements this year. I mean, not with just their aerodynamics, but also driver confidence, chassis, and that new Ferrari powertrain is also seeming to do pretty good.
Yeah, in terms of their objectives that they had set for themselves for this preseason test, it was just to make sure that their car was reliable and it didn't break down a lot. And they got through that with ease. They didn't really have a lot of problems with their car. I think Bottas may have had just one problem when they had to take the car back to the garage, but they had a really smooth preseason test. And Joe Guan Yu also, he topped one session in day two. He set the fastest time, so their performance is there as well with the car. But I think reliability was the main thing for them going into this test, and they were able to get that done.
Yeah, I think Joe Guan Yu had a really solid rookie season last year, and so he'll be just gaining even more confidence throughout this year. And Valtteri Bottas, obviously out of that high pressure Mercedes environment, just loving life at the moment currently. So it'll be interesting to see the two as they get along with this new Alfa Romeo. They've changed the steering wheel a little bit too. It looks more like the Mercedes than it did with the Alfa Romeo of last year. But in terms of also their aerodynamics too, they have the sharp front wing, they have the curved side pod that all the traditional teams are running. So it's I don't think they've made like massive like shocker of improvement, but they have made the basic improvements to keep up with all the other teams. So I think they'll be a really solid midfield team at the start of the season.
Yeah, me too. So now moving on to the next team, that'll be Aston Martin. And I'm really excited about this team because we've seen, especially now, the amount of development that they've had on this car. Now they kind of have the Alpine style side pods where they have it's going down into the car like this gap. It's like a wall here with the side pod, but then there's like an indent down here. And yeah, it's gonna be like, I think their car now has a lot of performance, especially in the hands of Fernando Alonso, as we've been seeing. He finished second in two sessions. And also, when you look at their onboards, too, the car just looks like really good. Whereas last year, especially in the beginning of the season, when you saw Vettel driving it or Stroll, the car just looked like a mess to drive around. It was like understeering and oversteering. But now the car just looks all together like a Formula One car, and it's like has insane cornering speed. And so I think they're gonna do pretty good, especially with Alonso.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning it was pretty tough. I mean, Felipe Drugovich had to step in for Lance Stroll, obviously, after Stroll got injured in a biking accident. And within the first 9 minutes of the first session of preseason testing, Drugovich had to pull to the side with a failure, and so that kept him in the garage for like an hour before he could finally get back on track. But I mean, once that Aston Martin was on the track, I mean, it looked really fast, especially as you said with Fernando Alonso. And I think, I mean, Fernando, he's always been really good. I mean, even in those McLaren days with that woeful car, woeful power unit, he still was able to extract a lot. And this year with this Aston Martin, if it is as quick as they said, I mean, Alonso got P2 in a session one time, just behind Max Verstappen. And so it looks like Aston Martin can be a really decent team. I mean, a lot of the teams have been saying it looks similar to their cars last year in a legal way, but like the fact too that it's looked similar to the Red Bull here, similar to the Mercedes there. Obviously with that Mercedes power unit too, that's really good. Aston Martin could find themselves really high up the grid this season.
Yeah, I think outside the top three in terms of their performance, they're the best of the midfield right now. So especially with Alonso, he'll definitely be looking to take the fight to the big teams, and hopefully then he can like get his confidence back that he might have lost after last season when he kept fighting with Esteban Ocon. But yeah, it's really good to see Aston Martin now in their what's this like third season now in the sport after two mediocre years now. Hopefully they can finally get achieve the goals that they set when they came into the sport.
Vettel might have misjudged his retirement with this one. I mean, it looked
Yeah.
pretty quick.
I mean,
It,
there were rumors that he could have come back, but obviously today we just got the official announcement from Aston Martin saying that it will be Drogovic to replace Stroll if Stroll cannot make it in time. But yeah, I think all of us would have liked to see that Vettel Alonso duo.
I mean, they did think that Vettel maybe they could try to bring him back in Saudi Arabia because of the experience he does bring to them. But I mean, if you have a reserve driver in Felipe Drugovich, they're probably going to use him, and I don't think Vettel will even want to come back. Honestly, he'll be busy with other things, and I think he completely lost interest in F1 last year, so I don't think he'll really be coming back.
Yep. So Aston Martin, good preseason testing, good confidence with the team, confident drivers. It's looking good for them. So now the next team that we'll be talking about is Haas. And Haas, again, like they just had a pretty Haas type preseason testing, like a really good like in terms of their performance. Think they were slightly better too than they were last year. In terms of the whole midfield, I think every team in the midfield, like obviously outside the top three, every team but McLaren are really close together and it's kind of hard to judge where everyone is right now. But I think we can see like the top three are in their own league, and then McLaren is in their own league at the bottom. But other than that, all the midfield teams look pretty close together.
Yeah, I think Haas have made a pretty good step up, and then also with their driver lineup to Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen, they have two really fast and experienced drivers. So they have really good drivers at Haas, and their car too. They have really good improvements with the aerodynamics, like the rear wing and the front wing, and also the chassis, the side pods. So Haas could find themselves much farther up, battling with the likes of probably Alpine and Alfa Romeo. I mean,
Yep.
even McLaren too, but I think McLaren is just going to be at the back.
Yeah, before they get their act together. But Haas, I think they had a pretty good test. I don't think they had like any major issues. They were able to get a lot of laps in, a lot of data learned. So I think that they set all their objectives that they wanted to.
Yeah, we also saw an extreme money management measure that they took with
Yeah.
that three-seat pit wall. I mean, it says that they say that it's going to help them save around $250,000 every year by downsizing that pit wall operations. I mean, so we'll see. I mean, it does look pretty funny, but in the end, it could prove to be a good idea taking that money and spending it somewhere else, like towards car development. That could be a really smart move from Gunter that he did.
Yeah, or better facilities too for the team just to again like develop that car. But yeah, Gunter said like they don't need all those people there in the pit wall too, and he was happy to be in the garage if he needs to. If that's a way for them to save money. We'll just see how it goes for them. But yeah, the Haas had a good preseason test, no major issues, lots of data learned. Drivers are feeling confident too. So yeah, now moving on to the next team, Alpha Tauri with another rookie in their driver lineup in the form of the 28-year-old Nick DeFries, Formula 2 and Formula E champion. So they both of the drivers were feeling really good about the season. Their car also looking pretty good. So yeah.
I think that drivers have lots of confidence. I mean, Yuki Tsunoda coming off of a pretty okay year for him. I mean, not the best, but it was also a pretty fine year for him. I mean, going to be his third year in the sport this year, so he's doing pretty good considering that. And Nick De Vries now in his next in his first year in Formula One with Alpha Tauri. I mean, Formula E world champion, 2019 F2 champion. He's gonna have a lot to prove in F1. I mean, we saw that he took his first debut in Formula One with Williams in Italy in 2022. And so that gave him a lot of confidence, and it gave Helmut Marko enough confidence to sign him up to AlphaTauri. So De Vries is going to have a lot to prove of that, why he should be in that AlphaTauri seat because they took someone from the Mercedes Academy and put them in a Red Bull F1 seat, whereas they have so many junior drivers they could have easily promoted up to an F1 drive.
Yeah, and Nick DeFree is obviously a really talented driver, but now Yuki Tsunoda, in just his third year in F1, is now stepping in as the team lead at AlphaTauri with having the most experience too. So he's gonna have to show France Toss that he's capable of being the team lead and guiding Nick DeFries maybe throughout the season in terms of how to develop the car as well, because they definitely don't want to have a repeat of the season they had last year, finishing ninth. So yeah, their car though was pretty good out on track. Their onboards looked good. The car didn't seem to have any major issues. I don't think that I can recall though. But and also both the drivers are feeling happy about the way the car was feeling too.
Yeah, the AlphaTauri now with their New Orleans sponsor, they have splotches of red on them, and so it'll definitely make their car stick out. But also in terms of their aerodynamics too, they have pretty good aerodynamics with their curved side pods and their like well-shaped rear wing. We saw the steep curve on the top of the rear wing and then the sort of flat sides on the rear wing. And AlphaTauri are have a pretty good car with them. I think it'll boost them up the order. I think they'll be a competitive midfield team this year, especially with driver confidence and their good car package. And then obviously they have that Red Bull powertrain, which is really good, like we saw last year. So it could be a good year for AlphaTauri.
Yeah, so now moving on to the final team, Williams Racing, and another team I'm really excited for because of their performance too. They had a really good preseason testing in terms of their expectations, like especially with their other rookie Logan Sargent, who he on day two completed the most laps out of anyone, 154 laps he completed, and he was also like pretty high up the order in the morning session. He finished second, and overall he got a seventh. And he was able to get through the whole run plan. Both him and Albon were able to get through their whole run plan throughout all 3 days. And so they obviously learned a lot of data, and their performance seemed to be there too in the car.
Yeah, it's a really important year for Logan Sargent coming through the academy, stepping up into that Williams F1C. And I think Williams have a really good car. I think they gained the most time out of any
Yeah,
team
they
compared
did.
to last
Yeah.
year. They gained about 2 seconds of lap time, which is incredible. I think they could find themselves again another midfield team. This midfield is going to be really competitive this year. Williams could find themselves scoring a lot more points this year, especially with the always improving Alex Albon and then this new Logan Sargent. They have two young but fast drivers. Sargent, we've seen him really fast in Formula 3 and Formula 2. So hopefully he can continue that form in F1, especially now with 3 US races. F1 is going to be looking to boost their American profile.
Yep. So yeah. So that's all the teams that we've discussed. And so Sumit, give me your prediction for the constructors championship. How you think it'll finish this year?
So I think it's going to be really close at the top, but I feel like again Red Bull is going to come out on top, but Ferrari will be second. However, though, I think Leclerc will take the drivers' championship. I feel like maybe it won't be a team effort, but it'll be a him effort in terms of getting that drivers' championship. I think though Mercedes will finish third. I think Aston Martin will finish fourth, make a huge improvement, followed by Haas. I think Haas will be fifth. And then I think it's going to be really close between Haas and Alpine, but I think Alpine will just be sixth. And then Alfa Romeo seventh. Alpha Tauri, I think while they're going to have a pretty decent season, I think they're going to be ninth. And McLaren, I think they're going to be 10th. Like Williams, though, I think they're going to be somewhere in the middle of that. I'm not quite sure where they're going to be, but they're going to be, I think, in the middle of that kind of.
Yeah, I think they might finish around sixth or seventh because they obviously they have a good car this year, but the other teams are just like I think they just have a even better car, and obviously Logan Sargent too. He like in a he's gonna be like a really good driver, I think, but he just might not be able to get as many points as maybe Albon would. So I think that'll just hold them down in terms of how they do. But you said Leclerc would win the drivers' championship. I think Max Verstappen will again win the championship because he's just in like really good form right now. But yeah, Leclerc, it'll be exciting to see a title fight this year. Maybe someone like George Russell can also join it.
I think Alonso might be in the title fight for a little bit. I mean, that Aston Martin looks pretty quick, and we know Alonso, he's capable of almost anything. I mean,
Yeah.
so it'll be really nice. It'll be funny to see if Alonso can bring himself into title contention for a third world championship.
Yep, time will tell then. But thank you guys for joining us and listening to this episode as we talked about the preseason testing and we cast our predictions. So in the comments, let us know your guys' predictions for the drivers' championship and the teams' championship too. And be sure to join us next time when we take a look at round one in the 2023 Bahrain Grand Prix. Thank you.